Obviously, there is standing up in the chamber and talking to the NGOs or the member states that are present at the time. But in addition, they're bringing together NGOs outside of the chamber to sort of coordinate strategically what they're doing. They're holding briefings, so outside of the chamber, again, you have sort of side issues like fringe events, where you can kind of find out who's going to support you or not. You meet with NGOs and national missions to try and get them on board and understand what your issue is, if maybe they didn't before. You work with the other UN agencies and officials and coordinate NGO campaigns and initiatives. So I know that one of those that we were very proud of at one point was getting lots of NGOs over a very short space of time to sign our petition on blasphemy. Okay, so freedom of religion or belief, the freedom of conscience. This is first established in Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and that's really important. We have to keep going back to the sort of documentary basis for these things. But that doesn't establish international law. That gets done later on. So the freedom of religion or belief that was spelled out in the UDHR is only given force in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR. You know, in 1966, some years later. And again, it gets more elaborated because people will still disagree about what the wording actually means. So that's, in particular of importance for us, is this Declaration on the Elimination of All Forms of Intolerance. So the actual declaration initially says everyone has a right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief and freedom either alone or in community with others. So it sounds quite broad, but the objection then is sometimes that, well, belief sounds a bit faithy, it sounds a bit religious, and that's an objection lots of humanists will have to it as well, that well, I don't like to describe my humanism as a belief. So this had to be spelt out in the Human Rights Committee, as it then was, that Article 18 does protect theistic, non-theistic and atheistic beliefs, and that it's to be interpreted broadly. It's not limited to traditional religions, and non-traditional religions can have similar practices and they need to be similarly protected. So further individual points that have come out of these various elaborations are that it's not a right for religions but for individuals. And so I'm saying all these because I think that you can look at all the commentary that's come out and you can make these clear cases. And obviously there'd still be some people who would disagree on some of these individual points. But this is certainly what we think can be derived from the available law and treaties. That freedom of conscience, freedom of thought and belief is not a right that privileges religious believers over the non-religious. That it does include the right to leave a religion, that it does include the right to criticise religion, and that includes the right to blaspheme as well. Here's some current victims of blasphemy around the world. And Aisha Bibi in Pakistan has been there for a couple of years now, awaiting death by hanging. They haven't carried out an execution of that kind in Pakistan, but she's still in jail and it's still hanging over her head, and in principle that penalty could get approved by a higher court and she could be executed. She was a Christian who, an argument developed in her village. She was asked to fetch water, she fetched the water. Someone told her that because she was a Christian the water was unclean. She said, no, it's not, and so someone said, you desecrated the Quran and offended the Prophet or something, and the whole case comes out of that. And it's that very, very common pattern of blasphemy accusation that many of us have probably heard of, where the sort of malicious accusation is made. But you know, it's meant that this young mother has been away from her children and in jail, awaiting death since 2010, I think. Hamza Kashgari in Saudi Arabia is a poet, young 20-something guy. He sent some tweets last February, 3 short Twitter messages on the internet that, you know, in no way were hateful. No one sensible, you would think, could look at them and think these were hateful or blasphemous in an insightful or inciting or hateful way. But they were completely. He said. They were messages to Muhammad on Muhammad's birthday, and he was basically saying, I love you and hate you. I've learned so much from you, but I hate the halos of divinity around you. If I met you, I'd shake your hand as an equal and we'd talk about things. So he certainly wasn't saying, I hate all the Muslims or something. He was clearly showing that he was from a Muslim background and has a complex relationship with the religion that he was brought up in. He was accused of blasphemy. He fled to Malaysia. They probably illegally extradited him back to Saudi Arabia, and he's been in jail now since February. We haven't really heard much from him. His mother was on TV there a few months ago, forced to. I mean, obviously, when I say forced, I don't know exactly what she's thinking. But in real terms, she probably can't defend him and say, you know, this isn't blasphemy, because then she can be accused of blasphemy. She also can't just say, it is blasphemy, because then that would make it even worse, of course. So what she said on TV and some talk show was, please let him go. He's just a kid. He doesn't really know what he's talking about. He's not really a poet. He's just a boy. So she had to kind of push away what were actually incredibly meaningful stuff. And he's obviously an established journalist and poet and writer. But I imagine that that's the only strategy that was available to her. So she had to cry and beg for his release on live TV. But he's still in jail. And we've all heard of Pussy Riot, probably the Russian punk band that are currently two members of which are currently in a penal colony in Russia. Alexander Arm was in Indonesia, who's a young atheist who created a Facebook page. Again, this is all last year. Apart from IHEU, this is all last year, and he's in. Alexander Arm he's still in jail in Indonesia for creating that Facebook atheist page. Sanal Edamaruku in India was invited by the Catholic Church or some Catholic priests to come and debunk one of their miracles. He turned up and he said, yes, the statue is crying because of capillary action soaking up water from your drain pipe, and that's why it appears to be crying. And so he's had to flee India, because after that they said, well, you're a blasphemer, and petitioned the police to arrest him. Rimsha Masi, young Christian in Pakistan, and Al-Baseba in Egypt. He was bailed, and then he's fled to outside of Egypt. But so he's essentially in exile. He can't go back at the moment. So that's the kind of, there's a really sort of personal level in which blasphemy is affecting people all the time, religious minorities and non-religious people, that is destroying lives, making people with very long jail terms, sometimes disappearing forever. But I think there's a wider cultural impact as well. This is one of the famous Muhammad cartoon images from the Gillen's Poston affair. And the reason I display that, in a way, literally is to shock, because I think it still has this weird chilling effect on me, and I'm really used to seeing this image. We know that it's one of the cartoons that the mere depiction of which, the mere inclusion of it in a magazine prompted all these riots and protests. And the fact that it can still send shivers down the spine of someone who intellectually is completely against blasphemy shows that sort of chilling effect that blasphemy laws can have on individuals or on whole cultures. So blasphemy at the UN is a really complicated issue. Defamation of religions is largely what they've been referring to. They originally, the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation, which is a big umbrella group of Islamic states, back in, I think, 1998, said, we want a blasphemy law that says you can't criticise Islam. And lots of other member states said, you can't do that, that's stupid, you can't be that specific in international law. So they came back the year after and said, it's defamation of religions, all the religions, you can't insult all of them. And people went, oh, okay, that sounds better. So lots of more sensible organisations had to try and resist that push. But of course they make the case that defamation of religion is bad because it's like incitement to hatred, in that it's like it prompts people to respond in this terrible way. So what we actually saw was that the United Nations, the Rights Council, passed a resolution in accordance with the OIC's wishes, saying that the Council disapproved of defamation of religion, that it was okay to have laws in domestic law against defamation of religion every year from 1999 until 2011. And it even passed at the General Assembly a similar version of this OIC-backed defamation of religion law every year from 2005 till 2011. So even the General Assembly, not like the Human Rights Council, the member states narrowly voted to approve this for a very long time. And just to be clear, defamation includes things as broad as negative projection of Islam in the media. It's anything you care to say, not just some extreme provocative act. So our response was, obviously, again, we spoke at the UN, at the Human Rights Council, and at the Committee of Freedom of Religion or Belief in New York. We lobbied nations and tried to get individual member states on board, many of who, you know, it's possible for a member state delegation team to hear something like this and have it presented to them as like, yeah, well, defamation of religion is a bit like an anti-racism law or something like that, and that's why you should back it, and it can be made to sound meaningful, and so you need to spend some time convincing well-meaning people who've been sort of given the opposite story about it. We worked with other groups and pulled together 200 NGOs at the Human Rights Council in 4 days to sign a petition against the resolution. Obviously there's publicity and media work to be done to make sure that there is some pressure coming from outside on the chamber. And we released a document called Speaking Freely About Religion, which kind of spelled out in a large policy paper the arguments in law against this defamation of religion resolution. And it argued that defamation of religion has no legal validity. You can't protect in this way a set of beliefs. We argued that it violates freedom of expression, Article 19, that it violates freedom of religion or belief, that's Article 18 of the UDHR, that again, it was really just a blasphemy law. Like, part of the argument is you have to remind people, like, they originally tried to put a blasphemy law, they called it something different, and then you were more sympathetic, but actually this is all it really is. That it has the same potential for abuse as blasphemy laws, these malicious uses that we've seen. And that there are existing UN standards. We already have the potential in international law. You can create domestic laws against actual incitement to hatred or violence. So there's no need for this extra prohibition against blasphemy. It can't possibly achieve anything except to stifle free speech in certain areas. So that all this pressure, I mean, obviously we weren't the only organisation campaigning on this, but we're in a fairly unusual position, IHEU, at the UN, because we're one of very, very few explicitly secular, non-religious organisations that are cohesive. You know, we're not single issue, we're not just about family planning or something like that. We can bring these kind of arguments in a way that others can't. So I think we were very influential over this time in bringing the 4 votes down. The blue line there is votes for the resolution in the years since 2005 at the GA, and the pink line is the votes against it. And you can see that they nearly project to the point where in 2011, where in 2012 rather, we would have seen a vote against it. But so because now the OIC could see that they were losing the argument, there was a new approach. And Pakistan and the US, on opposite sides generally of the debate on blasphemy, mediated by the UK, put together a new resolution which was about combating intolerance, and it replaced all of this defamation of religion language, but the idea was, I mean, essentially, countries like the United States were doing this in order, I would say, in order to stop the defamation of religion resolution coming again. And in reality, the resolution we end up with just reiterates stuff that is already in other resolutions, but it keeps those countries that did want something about religious intolerance to be passed. So this new resolution that we helped work on, the UK government, I mean, outlaws only incitement to imminent violence. It doesn't mention blasphemy, it doesn't mention defamation of religion. It passed unanimously, and an expert at that point in 2011 was able to say the concept of defamation of religion no longer has any traction in the world of human rights. And since I first put this presentation together, that doesn't work again, because since then we've seen the YouTube video last year, and that was very well timed, as it happens. Before the General Assembly this last year, the OIC immediately started saying again, oh look, this proves, the Muhammad video proves that we do need a defamation of religion resolution. But at least in 2011 and since then, we can say there's been no resolution on defamation of religion. But they are going to keep coming it back. Even last week, the OIC was talking again about bringing it back. I wanted to mention one more element of our policy agenda, because this is quite new. So this isn't directly connected to the UN work. This is the Freedom of Thought Report 2012. This is our first an inaugural annual report that we released in December for Human Rights Day. that is looking at countries around the world that systematically discriminate against non-religious people, and it gives descriptions of the laws in place that discriminate against non-religious people, and case studies and examples of ways in which this happens and named individuals. That's Alba Saber on the front, the blogger from Egypt that had to flee into exile. So this is something that we're inviting national groups and local groups, and anyone with some time and some expertise in writing and researching. We need more input for this for next year. It covers 60 countries at the moment, but obviously the countries that aren't included, that's just because we only have so much information and time. Next year we want to include more countries, update it with cases from this year so that it's always very, very current, and we want this to become a sort of major milestone for recording discrimination against non-religious people on a yearly basis, and affecting change, of course. And on the day after it went out, Mauritania was elected to the Human Rights Council, to be the president of the Human Rights Council, and media were able to sort of latch on to the fact that they'd been included in this report the day before and say, look, this is absurd. A country that has just been included in a report about the human rights abuses against non-religious people has now been made president of the Human Rights Council. So it's that kind of effect that we want to see it have, that it can become something that media and other commentators refer to curb this persecution. And I think I'll stop there. It's been long enough. And I'm sorry for not being Evan Harris.